Is a contract year a real thing? Do we have to pay attention to it in fantasy leagues? Let's dig in, figure it out, and listen to Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd. I'm just getting ready to go out for Mad Monday. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So, subscribe and double bang and comment and give the thumb and all that sort of stuff. I know that there are going to be people that already disagree with this show on its premise, and I'm going to get this question and comment at any point, and I'm going to see it, and it's going to infuriate me always. The idea of a contract year. You hear about it all the time. I'm drafting this guy. It's a contract year. It's going to ball out. This guy only plays well on a contract year. And I do this every year. We run the numbers every year. The result is basically the same every year. Yet still, this narrative, it persists. Part of the reason the narrative of, and I'll give you a spoiler alert of the title, does the contract year exist? The answer is no. So you know that, but let's break it down. The idea is that people see someone in a contract year have a big season, right? And they go, look at that. He balled out the contract year. The player that's in the contract year that goes completely backwards, nobody talks about it. We don't say, man, he was in a contract year and he absolutely was disgraceful and he provided nothing. No one talks about that part of it. There's a lot of other things that are sort of self-fulfilling type prophecies on this. I don't know, self-fulfilling prophecy is the right word. But it happens a lot. So we go through and we look at all this stuff and try and break it down and highlight where we pay attention through looking at contract years. So when we start off with this, the number one thing that we do want to pay attention to is, what are we talking about? What is a contract year? Well, basically, the most basic part of it is it is a year in which at the end of the season, you are in line for a new contract. Right, so theoretically, the idea is, and this is always perpetuated, man, I can get more money at the end of this contract, so now I'm going to play harder, I'm going to play better. That is that idea. I believe there's been data in other sports that show that people in contract years maybe don't go as hard so they can reduce risk of injury so they get their next contract. But, I know that in baseball, there's a very clear example of that. I believe it was Bryce Harper in his contract year where he just stopped in the field, stopped laying out for dangerous balls and just not trying to run that risk of injury because he was in a contract year. So, and that part, we don't get this idea. I think this is, again, it all comes down to psychology of people who don't make $10 million a year or whatever it is on a contract thinking, well, I'm going to go real hard this year. And then there's the other part of that of, do you think that the team and the coach is just hey, bro's in a contract year, can everyone just get out of the way? Just clear out, let him do his stuff. Because that's what we're not about winning. We're about this guy getting a new contract. It's an easy narrative to throw out there. It's thrown out there all the time. And every year that I've done this analysis, it has proven either negligible or just completely false. Let's see what we're talking about here. So there are some challenges in putting some of this stuff together. Right? There are 5 main types of how we look at players heading into a contract year. The easy one is you are an unrestricted free agent after the season. That's the easy one. No one's going to debate that one whatsoever. There's the restricted free agent. So technically you will be getting a new contract after the season, but your team holds your restricted rights. And there's matchability, and that puts sometimes a limit on the money that you get. But you go from a rookie scale contract into a big time, full-blown real NBA contract. There are player options. And the player options do become interesting because usually if you play really well, you decline your player option and become an unrestricted free agent. If you play poorly, well, you just pick up your player option. So you don't then become a free agent. That still is a contract year though, because if you have the incentive to play well, then you will decline your option to become a free agent. If you struggle, well then technically you're not a free agent that next season, but you still had the option to do that. That's the same with rookie extension. So we're talking about players in their third seasons. The Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, that group of players. This is, is that the right, no, I'm trying to think, is that the right group of players? Yes, that's no, mate, am I wrong on that? I think I'm wrong. Which group of players is that? Is that right? No, it's sorry, my bad. It's the group heading into their fourth season. So you've played 3 seasons. I knew I was wrong on that. Didn't sound right. You're heading into your fourth season. So it's the Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Jalen Green group. That's the ones who are eligible for rookie extensions right now. And they head into that, you can get extended right now. Actually, no, I was right. I'm just getting myself confused here. I was right. The rookie extensions are the players like, it's Paolo Banchero, it is Jabari Smith. Because they've played 2 seasons in the NBA. This is year 3. After year 3, you can sign a rookie extension. So while they're not technically free agents, they have the opportunity after this year to sign a big contract. The way that Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley and Scottie Barnes did this last offseason. So you are technically playing for a new contract to get an extension. The one that's really hard to track is veteran extensions, because I don't actually it's hard to get a list of everyone who is available for a veteran extension. I know the players who got veteran extensions. I know who those guys are, but I don't know the list of everybody who was eligible for one and then didn't get it. And then you have restrictions on how much money you can make in a veteran extension. So they're a tougher one to figure out the actual data for. But they're the 5 ways that you can get a new deal after the year or some point during the year. Unrestricted free agency coming up, restricted free agency coming up. You've got a player option on your contract. I guess the other one is team options or non-guarantees as well, where if you perform poorly, the team can just cut you. So it's almost a reverse scenario. You've got rookie extensions. So you play, if you exceed expectations or you do whatever you need to do in year 3, then the team can extend you after year 3. And then there's the veteran extensions, which there's a bunch of different rules that govern when you're eligible for that and how much you can get and how much all that makes sense. So they're the different ways that you can get to that spot. Now, in terms of how I'm going to view this, I've done this in the past, and this is how we'll do it again, is by fantasy points. Because I think with category leagues, we know it's about your build, and it's about your punting, and it's about your how have I used this player in my team and all that's punting and minus ones. It gets a little complex to try and get value out of it. With fantasy points, we're just going to use how many fantasy points did you score. I think that's a better way of trying to generate or understand how we can use this data here. So I look at 4 different things. I look, what did you score in one season versus what did you score in the other season? Easy. 22-23 to 23-24. What were your fantasy points? I also like to look at fantasy points per minute because sometimes the big production is just due to increased minutes. Some of that may be because you're playing so well that you get an extra role. Sometimes it's because you're in a team that's lost a bunch of players, so you just have to play more, therefore you just do more because of that. And then I also look at the percentage increase and decrease. How much did you increase your fantasy points? What percent? To try and normalize stuff. And then I also look at the gross increase, like how many actual points did you rise up? How many actual points did you decrease? And then we take median values of those across different cohorts, good word, to try and figure out if this stuff works. This can be a little bit dry, this show, absolutely. But I think just getting the overall idea of how it plays out, just so you've got this in your head for fantasy draft season. Today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Tickets, events, we love going to events because they're fun. Simple stuff, right? We want to go, but we want the best deals. And Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks. This is so it's just saves you so much time. Instead of having to sift through all of the options for the tickets, they just find the best ones. They highlight them at the top and they have them there for you. That's to do with all the other, they've got all the other great functions. The view from your seat, the all-in pricing, which you can switch on in the app so that you know what you're paying instead of worrying about what's getting tacked on at checkout. The flash deals, so something happening in your area right now, they just say, hey, you want to go? Prices go down the closer you get to game time as well. So whether it's baseball games, upcoming NBA preseason, the start of NFL season, all of these tickets, concerts, musicals, whatever. Game Time is going to have all of that. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Okay, so I've got a bit of an idea of how we are going about this. So let's have a look at some of the players that the top fantasy point scorers and the guys who fell into these categories and what happened to them last season. So LeBron, we know that he signed a contract in the last season. His fantasy points went down from 50.4. In those numbers you can see on the screen, the first number is 23-24. The second number is points per game in 22-23. So he went from 50.4 to 48.8. Jayson Tatum went from 50 down to 46.2. Now, Tatum did sign that max extension. We know that. But it wasn't because his production increased. It went down. And yeah, they won a title. But again, his numbers went down. So that was a theoretical contract year extension. Again, extensions are always hard. It was a contract year because he was extension eligible for a new contract. And he got it. And he scored 3 fewer points per game. Fantasy points. 4, actually. Donovan Mitchell. Big jump up for Don. He was at 42.9 the year before. He went up to 46.1. So much speculation about his future. He wasn't a free agent or anything, but he got an extension and he signed it. Scottie Barnes, this is a huge one. He went from 34.2 up to 44.2. And what I will really get you to focus on, some might say you're just doing this because of your narrative about contract years, but the guys that take usually the biggest steps forward, and there's always context behind all of this. There's context behind why Tatum's numbers fell, because the team got Porzingis and they were just a better team, so he did less. And that's why every individual player should be just viewed independently, not like contract year, love it, big numbers. So Scottie Barnes jumped up 10 fantasy points per game. Was that because he was in a contract year? Was that because Fred VanVleet left? Was that because OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam were traded? Was it because he just naturally progressed from year 2 to year 3? You will find that the majority of players for contract years that take the big steps forward are the guys that are in year 2 to year 3 for a rookie extension, year 3 to year 4 for restricted free agency. And is that money? You could argue, well, they've gone from a rookie contract to a big max contract, so maybe it's part of that. Or they're 23 years of age with 3 to 4 years NBA experience, which is the very, very clear time where players are starting to hit their max and having the rapid improvement. And that's exactly what happened to Barnes there. Jalen Brunson, big numbers rise from him. 39 fantasy points up to 44. But we all know part of what happened there. Julius Randle was out half the season. OG Anunoby came across. He was out. Barrett quickly traded. I reckon if we look at Brunson's numbers from the beginning of the season, he's probably at around 38 a game. It's about the same. So while he did rise, and this will all go into the overall batch of numbers that we use for the year, like, is that like indicative, or is it there individual reasons behind all that? So there's a couple of real big ones there, like Brunson jumping up, Barnes jumping up, Tatum dropping down, LeBron dropping down, Mitchell going up. It's a little bit all over the place, which is okay. It's okay to be all over the place. We're going to go through more of the details. These are the top fantasy point scorers who were in that contract year situation last season. In terms of a next group of guys, Alperen Şengün. He went from 34.5 points up to 43. Now, Alperen Şengün is eligible still for a rookie scale extension, and he hasn't got it yet. I don't know if he will get it, but he's eligible for it, and he took that step forward. Was that because he was eligible for an extension, which he has not received? Or was it because it was year 3, a new coach came in and he just played better? Tyrese Maxey went from 30.6 to 42.4. And like every single person that is watching this or playing fantasy basketball or watching the NBA knows why, James Harden wasn't there. So he became the primary playmaker and the number 2 offensive option. Was that because he had a new contract coming up as a restricted free agent? Or was it because he changed roles? You could argue that if he had have changed roles after he signed his restricted free agent contract, would it mean that his points were lower? That he wouldn't have improved? I highly, highly doubt that. But we also don't know because it didn't happen. That's not what happened. Kawhi Leonard. He was he had signed an extension at the end of the year. He could have been a free agent, much like Paul George. He went from 41.6 to 42.2 fantasy points per game. So about the same. DeMar DeRozan was a free agent. He went from 40.5 to 40.6. So literally didn't change at all. Steph Curry, 46.8, went down to 40. And we know Steph just signed a 1-year, $64 million extension. So he was eligible for an extension because he signed it. But he dropped 7 points per game. Again, there are many other variables we can put in here. Well, is a guy over 30, therefore he doesn't need the money as much. He's not as motivated by it. There are different ways we can look at it, but I'm just trying to present the information that we have here in terms of the guys who fit into those categories that we use to begin things. Let's take a look at the guys who had the biggest increases in their overall fantasy points per game. This is again where context becomes important. But Cam Thomas, who was eligible for a rookie extension, he jumped up 111%. So that's over double his production. Was that because he was playing for a rookie extension, which again, like Şengün, he has not received? Or was the opportunity there and he just played better? Simone Fontecchio, year 1, didn't do much. Year 2, 91% increase. He was a restricted free agent and got a new contract. Zaire Williams actually jumped 56%. And then he got salary dumped. So did he perform that well? Obviously not. He didn't do anything. Derek Jones Jr. was unsigned. Signed for a minimum. Didn't do anything at the start of the year. Played really well. Got a new contract with the Clippers. 55% increase. Was that because that it was a contract year? Because the year before was also a contract year for Derek Jones and he didn't do anything like this. And Isaiah Hartenstein, he jumped up 50% production. Was his increase in production because that it was a contract year or because Mitchell Robinson was out all season and Isaiah Hartenstein was healthy, the reverse of the season before? But they are the biggest improvers. The guys on the flip side of this, the guys who took the step down, Christian Wood had a player option. So theoretically on his minimum deal, if he had balled out, he could have become a free agent and signed a big deal. His production dropped 47%. Markelle Fultz remains unsigned. He's an unrestricted free agent. He dropped 39%. Spencer Dinwiddie, unrestricted free agent, down 32%. Kyle Anderson shot the ball the worst he ever has. He was down 28% in his production. Chris Paul had a non-guarantee on his deal, and the Warriors had to make that choice whether they were going to keep him or not. And obviously they didn't because he got waived and he was signed with San Antonio. But Paul went down 26% in his production in a contract year. And again, you can say, well, Chris Paul is old. That's true. But Markelle Fultz is not signed contract year. Didn't do anything. Injuries, yes, impact. Christian Wood, he's Christian Wood, but that motivation is if there's one player you could ever say, man, if he's going to ball out in a contract year, it's going to be Christian Wood. He didn't. He was terrible. He's really his production dropped significantly. So it's a bunch of the guys who had the biggest overall decreases in their numbers, which again is important to note. The main takeaway I want you to get from all of this is that everything has individual context to it. Let's get back with the results and look at the players who are going to be heading into some form of contract year this offseason. Today's episode is brought to you, though, by BetterHelp. When we're young, we learn so much stuff. We have a curiosity for learning, but as you get older, sometimes you don't. You can get stuck in your ways, whether it's your job or family taking priority. And you sometimes lose that level of curiosity. Kids, they're always learning and growing, but adults, sometimes we just don't push for that sort of stuff. Therapy can be a way that you can not only rediscover that curiosity to learn and grow, but it can be internal growth in yourself as well, which again is something that we do lose a little bit as we get older. It can help you to rediscover your sense of wonder, the things that make you feel better and the things that help you, learn and improve. And all those things are great parts of improved well-being. If you've been thinking of starting therapy, well, you can give BetterHelp a try. We all know that it's entirely online. It is convenient and designed to suit your schedule. You fill out an online questionnaire and they match you up with a therapist who best fits what you need and what you're looking for. If you don't match properly with that therapist and you get in there in a minute and go, this isn't working for me, well, you just can switch to a new therapist free of charge. Because if you don't have a connection, if you don't feel comfortable talking, the whole purpose of this is gone. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Go to betterhelp.com BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So we've gone through those names, the biggest increases, the biggest decreases, what the top performers were doing. Again, we always like to highlight, well, look what the big names did. Look what the big production improvers, the breakouts did. Whereas not always focusing on the guys that stepped back. So let's look at the results. I think, about 85. I didn't want to go through all 500 NBA players because there's no point looking at the guys who play 4 minutes. So we sort of kept it to about the top 250 fantasy producers, around that mark. There was about 85 players that fit the criteria that I set out. So what were the results? If you're looking at just pure fantasy points per game change with the median numbers, what was the result? Well, median numbers dropped 0.71%. That is not a big change. To be transparent, if you use an average number, the average saw it rise by 1.7%. But that is also, there are highly skewed numbers like Scottie Barnes improving 15 fantasy points or whatever it was. And using a median to try and eliminate some of that skew, I think is important. But irrespective if it's negative 0.71 or positive 1.7, that is a very small change. Think about this. A player that averages 40 fantasy points, a 10% change is 4 points. Yes? 10% change is 4 points. So a 2% change, a 1% change, a 2% change is 0.8 points. So if you go up 2% or down 2%, who cares? It's not relevant. It doesn't mean a single thing. What is probably, not a little more interesting, but didn't expect this one, the fantasy point per minute, those players rose significantly. So every one of these players who were in that status of contract year jumped 2.4% fantasy point per minute. That is, per minute, that is an interesting number. That is guys' overall production, not based on role necessarily. Well, it doesn't include usage here because that can change, but doesn't, obviously the minutes part of it is taken out of it. That's interesting, that number. 2.4% is not a big deal. It's not a huge impact thing at all, but it's interesting. The raw fantasy points per game changed on the median number, negative 0.13. So basically, exactly the same. The fantasy points per minute, raw change, plus 0.02 points per minute. That's the same again. These are not statistically significant, really, in any sense of the word. If I take out any player who signed a veteran extension or a rookie extension, right? Because I do think there are ways to look at this, like the rookie extension and the veteran extension in particular, like getting the data of the guys who didn't sign veteran extensions is really hard to find. If you go back in time, like to find those sort of players to balance that out is really hard to find. So if we take those guys out who signed extensions, and some of them like Steph and Jayson Tatum signed extensions and had their production drop. So it's not just guys who rose. But if you take out everyone who signed an extension out of that group, the fantasy points per game dropped 4%. So this is accounting for unrestricted free agents, players who had player options and picked them up, and of course the ones who declined them and became unrestricted, and restricted guys. That's the three groups we're looking at here. Fantasy points per game changed down 4%, so those players lost 4% of their value. Their fantasy points per minute dropped 2.2%, so that's the reverse of what the other one was. That's a big difference. It's almost a 5% swing. Your fantasy points per game raw change median number was 0.98. So players who fit this criteria as a median number lost 1 fantasy point per game. Again, that is an insignificant number, but what it isn't is a rise. And it's not a big drop. It's a neutral number. And your fantasy points per minute raw change was negative 0.02 fantasy points per minute. Again, just a small number, but that did change when you take extensions out of the mix. So what if we go one step further and take out the younger players? Because we talked about these guys, these second-year players heading into third year. the third-year guys heading into fourth year, which is our natural growth curve. We've spent the last few days talking about rookies, second-year players, third-year players, and how we know that they improve. So what if we take out the players that signed the rookie extensions, like I said? What if we take out the players who then were becoming restricted free agents? Because there is that natural improvement in a player's production from year 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. It's a general trend across sport. So what happens then to those numbers? So if we take it into players who were unrestricted free agents and the non-declined player options. Well, their fantasy points dropped by 5% as a median number. Their fantasy points per minute dropped by 3%. Their fantasy points per game raw change was 1.4 fewer fantasy points per game, and their raw change in the per minute number was 0.03 fantasy points per minute. Again, 1.36 fantasy points is very small. It's 5%. But once you take out and you're trying to control for natural young improvement and just sort of focus it on the guys who are actually heading into a contract year that's not a restricted deal, it actually goes backwards. And that has been a very, very consistent theme through every year that I have done this, is that the initial grouping of players that we look at, there's sometimes a marginal increase, but relatively statistically insignificant. You take out extensions and the number either stays flat or it drops, and then you take out restricted guys and it nearly always drops. So when we're looking at all that, what is our major takeaway from this? I would say is that irrespective of contract, the players that we look at to take these leaps forward are the year 3 players. Year 2, obviously, but they don't come under the contract year purview. We talked about them earlier in the year, how we almost double the amount of top 120 players we get from year 1 to year 2. That's basically the way that goes. So we look at third-year guys. We look at fourth-year guys who are getting rookie extensions or becoming restricted free agents. They're the players who take the steps forward. They're the ones who have the sizable improvements. Players who are in line to sign veteran. I had this discussion, like Matt George from Locked On Kings came on and told us about Darren Fox and his looming upcoming veteran extension. There were people in the comments, he's going to ball out extension coming. But as a general rule, I'm not sure how much that matters. For guys at that level, they're already playing hard. They're already doing the best they can to help their team win, I would think. Also, part of the reason I don't like the contract year narrative is it sort of paints players as guys who don't care, who don't try, and only try when there's money on the line, which, again, the evidence suggests is completely false. But then it pushes into a narrative of this stuff that just gets chucked around by grifting hucksters with terrible agendas. When, again, the numbers will suggest something very different. So who are the guys this year who fall into some of these areas? Just so you know, because you might see someone talk about the contract year coming up and how that impacts it. Again, individual situations is important. So these 6 players have player options. LeBron, again, he's 40. He's going to improve again? Probably not. He decreased last season. Jim Harden. Now, James Harden is almost definitely going to improve this season. Is it because he's, like I said, he had a player option. He was in a contract year last year and he dropped. His numbers dropped. And now he's got a chance to be in another contract year due to his player option, and his numbers are probably going to rise. So if you're going to make the argument that Harden is going to see his numbers rise because he's got a contract year coming up, it doesn't fly because he had a contract year last year and that didn't happen. Kyrie Irving has a player option decision to make. Will the addition of Klay Thompson mean that Kyrie does more or less? Julius Randle, he has a player option. The Knicks are obviously stronger. Is Randle going to get better because of his player option? I don't know. Jimmy Butler, surprised he actually still plays for Miami, to be honest. And this is one that I have heard people, Jimmy, contract year, he's going to go out and prove Pat Riley wrong. Or he's 34 and he gets hurt all the time and maybe he just physically can't do that anymore. It'll be one to watch. And actually, Rudy Gobert has a player option. I don't think Gobert is going to decline that player option. But what if he goes like crazy again, they win the title? He's Defensive Player of the Year once more, which again, no one will vote for him because of the backlash. I know this. But he has a player option too. What about the guys who are upcoming unrestricted free agents? There's been some talk that Jamal Murray was going to sign a contract extension. That hasn't come through. He struggled at times in the playoffs and he was terrible at the Olympics. But this is a contract year for Jamal Murray. Now, most people I know in fantasy are actually fading Jamal Murray. Like, man, I hated how he looked. But he's in actually the prime position that most people historically would say, contract year, let's go. In fact, most of the players on this list are like in that, like the upcoming unrestricted guys, where in the past people would have been ready to froth it, but most of the guys here you go, yeah, I don't know about this. The next one is Miles Turner. Now, Miles is not going to sign an extension. I don't think he's going to get benched or traded or anything like that. But is he really in a spot where he's going to do more? What about Brandon Ingram, the man that isn't traded from the Pelicans because no one wants to sign him to a max extension or no one wants to give him a max contract? Is he going to go out on a team that brought in DeJounte Murray and just tell everyone to settle down, I'm going to cook here, and put up big numbers? Or is he going to put up worse numbers? Probably worse. Ben Simmons. Well, we'll get to Simmons in a second. That's a spoiler view on audio. We're talking Simmons. D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo Russell was actually in a contract year last year, and I would say that he played pretty well. One of his best years. But he picked up his player option. He didn't test the market. That improvement in production didn't land him a new contract. And now he goes back again. Well, he doesn't have an option. He's an unrestricted free agent. So do we expect more from him? Well, the Lakers team didn't really change at all. So I expect he does much of the same. Ben Simmons. Does Ben Simmons, the player who hasn't played games for years, or enough games for years with multiple back surgeries, does he stay healthy for 70 games and put up big numbers because it's a contract year? Like, there is almost no one who was watching this who go, yeah, man, I can't wait for Simmons because, yeah, he's going to turn it around in a contract year. He actually could, though. But is it because he's healthy? I don't know. And Chris Paul, again. Chris Paul was a contract year player last year. Dropped way off. Goes to San Antonio on a 1-year deal. A better spot. He will start. His minutes will go up. His production probably rises. But like the previous season, it dropped in a contract year. And then we look at the players who are upcoming restricted free agents. Now, despite my confusion at the start, there is the bunch of players who are looking for rookie extensions. The year 3 players, your Paolo, Jabari Smith, the Bronco, Jalen Williams. We covered all of those guys on the year 3 preview show yesterday. But these guys are all year 4 players who are restricted free agents. We just talked about Şengün, who took a big step forward in year 3. Hasn't got an extension, but he's a restricted guy. Jalen Johnson is set for a big role this season. Now, is Jalen Johnson going to produce unbelievably because he's a restricted free agent coming up? Or is it because DeJounte Murray is gone and he has to absorb the second highest usage on the team now? Cam Thomas, the same. Like, big step forward last year. Bigger step maybe coming this year, or maybe not a bigger step, but another step coming. Is it because of a contract or because they traded away Mikal Bridges in an attempt to be the worst team in the league? Josh Giddey. Josh Giddey was in a contract year last year. Again, it's one of those ones that when people talk about contract years, they wouldn't talk that Josh Giddey was in a contract year. But he was in year 3. Obviously, the off-court turmoil surrounding him was there. But he was in year 3, and if he had have balled out, he could have secured a max rookie extension in July. But he did not. In fact, he was just traded straight up for Alex Caruso. So now he gets another crack at it. And his numbers will almost definitely rise this season. Is it because of situation and opportunity, or is it contract year? Jonathan Kuminga really did step up second half of last season. Could have received an extension, has not. I don't know if he's going to start for Golden State, but after they lose Clay, Kuminga probably is the number 2 offensive option now. So I'd expect his numbers to rise a lot. And then Trey Murphy is also a restricted free agent coming up. But he's still buried behind Zion and Brandon Ingram, and they bring in DeJounte Murray. I don't know if Trey starts or what his minutes are like. But if a couple of players are traded and he plays 35 minutes a night, his numbers will go through the roof. Or he could be completely suppressed all season in a bench role. But there are 6 restricted players who, and most of those, Şengün probably similar, maybe a bit more, but Johnson, Thomas, Giddey, Kuminga, all of their roles have opened up amazingly for them to be able to put up big numbers. And we'll see whether they're able to do it. Is this the definitive answer on a contract year? I don't know. Like, there are many ways that you can try and control for things. Do we say we take out everyone who's over the age of 33? Do we make it all players who are between 25 and 32 who are in their peaks? What do we find the guys who all had veteran extension eligibility and then include them, even though for some it makes zero financial sense to do a veteran extension, although Jalen Brunson did a veteran extension that made no financial sense. Giannis Antetokounmpo did a veteran extension that made no financial sense. That's where it gets a little bit iffy with the extensions. But if you just want to purely look at players who are player option free agents, restricted guys or unrestricted guys, the data has shown for many years that their production on the whole decreases. Small amount, an actual statistically insignificant amount, but it decreases. And if it's decreasing, what that means is it's not increasing statistically significantly. So, if you are in a situation where you find two players that you think are really similar and you're working out how you're going to decide who you want to draft, by all means, use contract year as a tiebreaker. But please do not enter any draft thinking that the guys that you're going to target are the contract year players because that means they ball out, because that does not happen. Younger players into year 3, into year 4, absolutely yes. That is a very common thing. Players with increased minutes and increased usage, yes, that is what we look at. But the contract year part of it is not. Argue about it in the comments if you like, but hit the thumb up while you're there, subscribe and download and double bang on audio and all that stuff. If you are here in Australia, happy Father's Day to all of the fathers. I hope you're having a great day. And guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.